The first arm is silence. So we've gotten beyond silence, and now we see an attempt to act in a nonchalant manner about something that is very serious. That does not mean that it is not treated seriously. Rather, there is, or at least was, certainly early on with the Afghan material, an attempt to make it look like it would not be treated seriously, to frame the material as if it was of no consequence. I highly recommend a Daily Show episode which collected all those "there's nothing new in this material" reports for Afghanistan. And as it has turned out, of course, that is not true. In fact, according to Pew Research, total war reportage in the United States for that week increased 300% from 6% to 18%. The approval rating for the Afghan war decreased approximately 15%, and Barack Obama's personal rating, depending on which poll you read, decreased somewhere between 4 and 8%. So those are only, of course, crude figures that speak about the whole rather than individual cases, but we can see continual reportage from far away, high quality reportage in the past 2 weeks from Norway and Espresso in Italy based upon that Afghan material. A number of parliamentary inquiries. I will be speaking at the UN early next month in relation to the Afghan material. So I expect the same thing to happen for this material for Iraq, and maybe even more. We're talking about 5 times the number of deaths in the same period. We've also put together, I think, a much stronger coalition, a much broader coalition at this time, involving not just print organisations, but human rights groups and lawyers and so on. So I think we're going to see some concrete effects, if not just the perceptual effects about how wars are conducted. An interesting note is that when I made the opening about the truth being the first casualty of war, we actually see that most wars that are started by democracies involve lying. Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin incident involved lying. The start of the Iraq War involved very serious lies, which were repeated and amplified by some parts of the press. Which leads us to say what? Not that isn't the world terrible because there's a lot of lying by officials, but rather it leads us to a great hope that democracies don't start wars unless there's lies. So if there's enough truth early on enough, then perhaps we won't see these kind of wars.
Over there, in white shirt.
Hi, question for Julian. Ed Caesar from the Sunday Times. There's been some suggestions in the hacking community that the systems that Wikileaks uses don't offer sources the full protection that you advertise on the site. Can you comment on that?
There is a lot of tabloid press surrounding our organisation, and of course every organisation that has a high profile and is involved in controversial activities. I have seen no reports that are credible.
No, right down here. Yeah. Yourself.
Yeah, I'm from ITM too. Can I just ask you a very general question? From your reading of all the reports that you've gathered, how would you characterise the conditions that existed in Iraq in the time period that you're reporting on?
Well, I think John is probably the best place to answer.
Could you answer it yourself first? I'm sorry, would you mind?
You prefer the more ignorant opinion, but I'll let John answer first, and if he misses something, then I'll comment.
Our focus is entirely on the victims and those who died. So what we can see, but it is simply a finer detailed picture of what was actually already very well known by the world at large and press and media, is this relentless grind of daily killings, day by day, in almost every town, every province in Iraq, of checkpoint killings, drive-by shootings, with no end. And the effect that that must have on the ordinary Iraqi people is just uncalculable. In regard to the other kinds of information in the logs, torture and other observations, we have nothing to say at this point.
Christian?
No? Okay. Next question. Right here. Right there. So.
I'll direct this question at Phil. On the importance of the government granting a full judicial investigation, if that doesn't happen, will they take each case on an individual basis and string this out for a decade and more, therefore lessening the impact of it? So the government coming round and granting that judicial review is crucial to your process, isn't it?
It is. The government's position is that it can deal with one case at a time, and each case will take a year. We have 142 outstanding cases, so that will take 142 years. The alternative is for the administrative court here in London to put teams of judges into courtrooms to deal with these cases within a proper timescale. Both of those, we say, are absurd, and that the only rational solution to all of these cases is to get it over with and hold a proper inquiry along the lines of the Baha Musa inquiry, which has just concluded. And the MOD really need to stop covering up, which they do with greater and greater desperation, slurring everyone that they possibly can. We all know that many things went badly wrong in Iraq. We know from the Baha Musa inquiry, for instance, that we should have had a detailed interrogation directive in force in Iraq. That directive would have told interrogators what they could, and more importantly, what they could not do. The MOD in the Baha Musa inquiry say, we're very sorry we didn't have one. And we're very sorry also that that meant that the interrogators fell back on training techniques from Chicksands. And we're also very sorry to admit that the training was completely unlawful. It involved forced nudity, keeping people naked if they wouldn't cooperate, harshing, invasion of intimate space, the use of threats. One man said to the Baha Musa inquiry, the only limits on coercion were the limits of one's imagination. And I'm not going to try and explain the horrendous things that people did to my clients when they let their imagination run wild. A lot of it involves paedophilic images, hardcore pornography, sexual intercourse and sexual acts in front of my clients, etc., etc., etc. You simply cannot say that this is all down to a few bad apples, a few rogue soldiers, a few isolated incidents. It's horrendous, it's been covered up, and you, the press, are often the people who allow it to be covered up because you simply don't run the stories. You're obsessed, some of you, with what we might have done in Pakistan or what we might have known in Guantanamo Bay. I say to you, wake up and have a look at what's happening in our High Court next month on November the 5th about what we actually did. We intend to open that inquiry and reveal material which no one has yet seen about the way in which we interrogated people. I invite you to turn up in force in the High Court on November the 5th and find out what the UK actually did and stop going on about what we might have done or what we might have known about what the US were doing. Because I can tell you a comparison of what we did, which emerges from all this evidence, which I have to say none of my clients ever have been found to be embellishing the truth, let alone lying. They've all been found to be telling the truth. So I invite you to come along and find out what we actually did. And just for 1 month, stop going on about what we might have been complicit in.
Okay, back there, in the back.
Mark Roche of Le Monde. Don't you have, unlike Afghanistan, that on Iraq, the public opinion has turned the page? We have been lied on, but life goes on. There are economic problems at the moment, and that there isn't the interest for Iraq that there was on Afghanistan this summer.
To whom are you directing the question?
Well, for Afghanistan, we had 14 pages of The Guardian. For Iraq, we have 9. And I suspect that's probably a proportionate view in the United Kingdom's press about the relative importance. But Iraq is now just cool enough, although remember there's still 50,000 US troops there and something like 150,000, 100,000 contractors. Iraq is now cool enough, at least in the public imagination, to properly take a look at it. And that's not something that is yet possible with Afghanistan. We did a little bit of that with the Afghan war log release because it was a primary source documentation, but otherwise views about patriotism and the supporting of troops and so on interferes with the process. For Iraq, I can see already in the news reportage a much fairer and less defensive portrayal of what happened in Iraq that has been revealed by this release. So these two countries do not stand in isolation. These are both modern Western wars. And the lessons of Iraq, which are ongoing, remember this material covers significant abuses occurring during the first year of the Obama administration, can be applied to Afghanistan and can be applied to other places that Western governments may choose in isolation or in coalition to invade. The war itself in the United States, I think, is becoming more of an issue. The Republicans are using the mismanagement of the Afghan war against the Democrats. We're 1 week before the congressional elections. And the Democrats can point to, rightly, the terrible abuses that occurred under a Republican administration. I hope that will permit raising of this issue. But I think in the last 24 hours, the press has been doing precisely what they should. And there's a good and broad spectrum. And you know, the press, when it concentrates on a press issue, can overplay things. But I think their response to this issue has been broad and proportionate and will continue.
Okay. Back over there behind.
The head of the Wikileaks website, the whistleblower website, that among other things has given out the news of 109,000 civilians who've been killed in Iraq between 2003 to 2009. And of course, the person that you last saw in the last frame was Julian Assange himself, the man who started all this. But among the characters who were present at that press conference that is even right now going on live in London as I talk to you was a gentleman called Phil Shiner. He is